Nobody heard what she said. Not the crew running cables across the backstage floor. Not the sound engineers making final adjustments to a PA system designed to fill a quarter-mile radius with sound. Not the security team positioned at every entrance. Not the producers with their clipboards and their earpieces and their tightly scheduled running orders. Not the 100,000 people who were still hours away, still in cars on the freeway, still in hotels applying sunscreen and choosing what to wear to the biggest music festival in the world. Nobody was close enough, and even if they had been, the wind across the Coachella Valley that afternoon was the kind that swallows words before they travel very far. The desert does not preserve private things, it takes them. But something was said. In the footage Hailey posted 2 days later, the behind-the-scenes carousel that stopped the internet cold with 4 words about what it had taken to get there, there is a moment. Short. Easy to miss if you are watching for the big things. If you are looking for the viral clip or the celebrity cameo or the moment that writes itself into festival mythology. Justin is standing at the edge of the stage during soundcheck. The field in front of him is empty. No crowd, no lights, no security barricades or VIP wristbands or phone cameras pointed at the stage. Just desert air and the enormous silence of a space that has not yet been filled, that holds only the echo of the music that is still being tested and adjusted and made ready. He is still. The way people are still when they are carrying something heavy and have found a moment of quiet to feel the weight of it before they are required to lift it in public. And Hailey is there. Not performing, not posing, not checking her phone or coordinating with the road team about the pop-up or reviewing the night's schedule. Just standing close enough that the words, whatever they were, belonged only to the two of them and to the desert that immediately took them. She reached up. She said something. And then he walked back toward the microphone. Nobody knows what she said. Nobody will ever know. That is the point. That is the whole story. Because in a weekend that generated more content, more discourse, more viral clips and trending topics and think pieces and hot takes than any music festival moment in recent memory, the thing that mattered most happened in a moment that no camera fully captured, in words that traveled no further than the few inches between her mouth and his ear. This is the story behind the performance. Not the performance itself, not the laptop segment or the streaming records or the Billie Eilish moment or the backlash about whether the set was ambitious enough. The story of what happened in the empty field before any of it began. The story of a woman who danced alone in a space built for 100,000 people, and what that dancing meant, and what she carried into it, and what she said when she walked to the edge of the stage. And why those words, whatever they were, are the real story of Bieberchella. But to understand what was whispered in that empty field, you have to understand what the weeks before Coachella actually looked like. Not the version in the press releases. Not the official narrative of triumphant comeback and Grammy nominations and sold-out festival slots, the actual version. The one that people who were paying close attention could see in the edges of things, in the Instagram posts and the silences between them and the specific quality of the worry that surrounded this performance in the weeks before it happened. Justin Bieber had been building back to this for years. The Ramsay Hunt syndrome that had ended the Justice World Tour in its tracks. The year of facial exercises and the fear of a performer who did not know if his body would fully cooperate again, if the smile that had been photographed millions of times would ever work symmetrically again, if the voice that had been his instrument since childhood would continue to hold. The quiet rebuilding that followed, which happened mostly in private and generated far less coverage than the collapse that preceded it. The Swag album that arrived without fanfare in the summer of 2025 and found its audience anyway, climbing charts on the strength of its honesty rather than its production. The Grammy nominations that followed. The Coachella announcement 11 days after Swag 2 dropped, which felt, to everyone who had been watching, like the final piece of a return that had been assembled with extraordinary patience and at great personal cost. And then, in the weeks before Coachella, something happened. Not dramatic. Not the kind of thing that makes headlines in the moment, though it would become one. Justin posted something on Instagram. A handful of words, the kind of raw, unfiltered admission that he has always been prone to making without the buffer of a publicist or a carefully worded statement. He wrote that he felt unworthy, that the life he had, the wife, the son, the career returned, the stage waiting in the California desert, felt like more than he deserved. It was brief. It was real. And it landed in the middle of an already anxious news cycle about his health and his stability with the particular weight of something that nobody knew quite how to hold. His representative moved quickly. Justin was fine. He was undergoing a transformative year. He had ended several close friendships, the statement said, and was realigning himself. He was looking forward to Coachella. Everything was as it should be. But the post had already distributed itself, and people who had followed Justin's story, the real story, not the tabloid version, the one that runs through the Lyme disease and the Ramsay Hunt syndrome and the years of quietly putting himself back together, those people read the post and heard something in it that the representative's statement could not quite address. They heard a man on the edge of the biggest stage of his comeback, looking at everything he had built and feeling, in some private and inarticulate way, that he had not yet earned the right to stand on it. That is not an unusual feeling for someone in recovery. For someone who has spent years rebuilding, not just a career but a relationship with himself, the moment of arrival can feel stranger than the long walk toward it. You spend so long moving forward that you forget to prepare for what happens when you get there. You forget that success does not automatically silence the voice that has been telling you for years that you are not enough, that you do not deserve the good things, that the life you have built might be taken away at any moment as payment for the life you lived before you knew better. Justin has been public about his struggles with substances. He has talked about the years when the pressure of being the most famous teenager in the world met the specific emptiness of a life lived entirely for other people's entertainment, and what he reached for to fill the space between performances. He has talked about faith and marriage and fatherhood as the things that gave him reasons to stay present when the old patterns pulled at him. He has been honest about this in the way that costs something, in the way that makes him more human and more vulnerable than the mythology of the comeback requires. The weeks before Coachella were not the worst of it. They were not a relapse or a crisis in the clinical sense. But they were hard in the specific way that the last stretch before something enormous is always hard. When the thing you have been working toward is finally close enough to touch and the fear of losing it becomes louder than the anticipation of having it. People close to him were paying attention. Reports emerged, unverified but widely circulated, that someone had been hired to stay with Justin in the days leading up to the performance. Not a bodyguard, not a manager. Someone whose specific role was presence, to ensure that the man who was going to walk onto the Coachella stage arrived in the condition he needed to arrive in. Whether or not that specific report was accurate in its details, its existence tells its own story. The anxiety around this performance was real. The care that surrounded it was real. And at the center of all of it, quiet and constant and never making a statement about her constancy, was Hailey. She has always been the person who stays. This is the thing about Hailey Bieber that gets obscured by every other narrative attached to her name. The replacement narrative, the wrong story narrative, the years of comment sections and comparison edits and fabricated screenshots. All of that noise about who she displaced and what she took and whether she deserved to be where she is. Underneath all of it, in the private hours that no camera reaches, she has been the person who shows up and doesn't perform the showing up. Who sits with him in the difficult mornings without turning the sitting into content. Who has built something with him that is specifically designed to be real rather than visible. Think about what 2018 actually asked of her. She was 21 years old. She had watched from the outside as the internet built an entire mythology around a love story that had ended. She had seen what the fans did with their investment in that story, the edits, the threads, the years of sustained hope for an ending the people actually living it had already decided against. She knew before she ever said yes to the ring that the decision to marry Justin Bieber would be received by a significant portion of the world as an act of intrusion, as a theft, as the wrong answer to a question that hadn't been asked of her. She said yes anyway, and then she stayed, which is harder than the yes. She was with him in the months after Ramsay Hunt, when the left side of his face would not cooperate and there was no guarantee that it ever would again. She sat across from him during the facial exercises that he performed every morning with the stubborn refusal of someone who has survived enough to know that recovery is not dramatic. It is just showing up for the unglamorous repetition, day after day, until the body remembers what it knew before the damage. She told him what she saw, not the optimistic version, the honest one. On the days when the movement came back slightly, a twitch, a resistance, she said so. On the days when nothing moved and the face in the mirror looked the same as the day before, she sat with that too. She was with him when the Swag album arrived and the world did not know what to do with it. When the songs moved too slowly for the algorithms and the sound was too personal for the radio, and the people who had been waiting for a Justin Bieber comeback expected something louder than what arrived. She was there in the quiet mornings after the reviews, when he had to decide whether the world's confusion about his music was going to shake his conviction that the music was right. It did not. He held his ground. She was part of the reason he could. She was with him in the weeks before Coachella when the unworthy post appeared, and the representative issued the careful statement, and the anxiety around the performance reached its peak. She was there for all of it, not photographing the difficulty for documentation purposes, not performing support for an audience that was watching and waiting and ready to interpret every public signal. Just there, the way she has always been there, the way that costs the most and generates the least content and is, ultimately, the only thing that matters. That is not a small thing. It is, in fact, the largest thing. And on the afternoon of April 11th, in the hours before 100,000 people arrived in the desert, she was there for that too. The soundcheck footage shows her dancing. This is the detail that landed differently than anything else in the carousel she posted. Not the Biebercella tattoo on Jack's arm, though that was beautiful. Not the photograph of the three of them backstage, though that was real. The dancing. She is in an empty field. The stage rises behind her, enormous and temporary, built for a single night's purpose. Justin is on it, running through songs, making sure the equipment will cooperate, scrolling through YouTube to ensure the clips are ready for the segment that would divide the internet 8 hours later. The crowd that will fill this space in the evening does not yet exist. There is just the stage and the desert air and Hailey with Jack in her arms moving to the music the way you move when nobody is watching and the music is asking you to. She was not performing joy for a camera. She was not curating a behind-the-scenes moment designed to humanize a celebrity couple for an audience that had decided certain things about them. She was just moving, with her son against her chest in a field that had not yet filled, to the sound of her husband's voice running through songs that would either land or not land a few hours from then, and there was nothing left to do about it except be present for the music. That image, a woman dancing alone in a space built for 100,000 people, contains the entire story of what this weekend cost and what it meant. It contains the years of recovery and the health struggles and the facial exercises and the unworthy post, and every morning she chose to stay and every morning he chose to try again. It contains the specific kind of love that does not photograph easily because it is not built from gestures, but from presence. From the accumulation of ordinary hours spent with someone, in the good times and the difficult ones, without requiring the difficulty to look a certain way, or the joy to be performed for a camera, or the love to be legible to an audience that has always believed it knows the story better than the people living it. She danced because the music was playing and her son was against her chest and the field was empty and there was nothing left to perform and everything left to feel. And then she put Jack down on the grass for a moment. She walked to the edge of the stage. She said something, and he walked back toward the microphone. The show that followed was not what everyone expected from a Coachella headliner. The staging was minimal. The production was stripped back. There was the laptop segment, where he pulled up YouTube and played old videos and sang along to the music that had made him famous when he was 12 years old, watching himself on the screen with an expression that moved through something complicated. The anger at the boy who had been thrown into something too large, the grief of the years that came after, and then, finally, something that looked like peace. Like a man who has decided to stop fighting the story of who he was and simply hold it alongside the story of who he has become. There was the moment, near the middle of the set, when he stopped singing and looked into the cameras and said the names of the people he was grateful for. His parents, his son, his wife, Hailey Bieber. Hallelujah. There was Big Sean. He came on stage during the second weekend and did not talk about the music. He talked about the man. He looked at Justin in front of the Coachella crowd and said the thing that the crowd needed to hear but that Justin needed more. I have seen you at times where it wasn't always beautiful, but you fought through it, and in a world where everyone's trying to take over the world, you give over the world. And there was Billie Eilish. She has been a Justin Bieber fan since childhood. This is documented, interviews from years ago, the specific kind of reverence that a young artist carries for the person whose music reached them before they understood what music could do. When Hailey nudged her backstage toward the stage, toward Justin who was performing One Less Lonely Girl, the cameras caught the moment in full. Billie's hands went over her face. She collapsed, literally buckled at the knees, at the surrealism of being chosen for the song that Justin had performed for fans since the beginning of his career. She fangirled. without embarrassment, without performance. She let the feeling be visible in a way that was so complete and unguarded that the clip of it traveled around the world within hours. The internet saw that moment as a celebrity crossover moment, as content, as the most viral clip of the weekend. And it was all of those things, but it was also something else. It was Hailey, backstage, nudging the right person at the right moment because she was paying attention, because she knew what would make the night meaningful beyond spectacle, because she has spent 8 years learning in the most intimate possible context what Justin needs from a performance, not just technically, not just logistically, but emotionally. What kind of moment reminds him why he does this? What kind of connection makes a stage that size feel like a room? She nudged Billie Eilish toward the stage. Nobody made an announcement about it. Nobody asked her about it. She posted the carousel and wrote the caption and let the moment be what it was, something that happened because she was present and paying attention and has spent years learning the specific language of the person she married. That is the thing about what Hailey whispered. The whisper is not one moment. It is years of moments. It is the accumulated knowledge of a person, his fears and his particular bravery, and the specific things that help him and the specific things that don't, translated into the right action at the right time. It built over 8 years into something so complete that she could stand backstage at the biggest music festival in the world and know, without being asked, what the night needed. That sentence, "You give over the world," is the sentence that explains the soundcheck footage. That explains why Hailey was dancing alone in the empty field. That explains what she might have whispered before he walked back to the microphone, because the thing that Justin Bieber has been learning in the years of recovery and rebuilding and the slow return to himself is that the stage does not have to take everything, that the performance does not have to consume him the way it consumed the boy who stood on a stage for the first time at 12 years old and handed everything over to the machine without understanding what he was giving, without knowing the terms, without having any reference point for what it would cost or what it would leave behind when it was done with him. There is a version of this life, the life he has been building, slowly and honestly and with Hailey beside him, in which he gives the music and keeps the rest. The wife, the son, the faith, the private hours, the empty fields and the sound checks and the whispers that the desert takes. For years, the stage had a claim on all of it. Everything was content. Everything was performance. Everything fed the machine that had been running since he was 12 years old and YouTube existed, and talent discovery meant becoming property of something vast and impersonal and indifferent to your welfare. His joy and his grief and his love and his exhaustion, all of it belonged to the audience. All of it generated headlines. All of it was processed and distributed and consumed before he had the chance to feel it privately, to decide what it meant, to understand it as his own before handing it over. What Hailey has given him, in 8 years of marriage that happened under the hardest possible conditions, and in the full glare of a world that had decided she was the wrong choice, is a space that the audience cannot reach, a version of his life that is not content. The empty field during soundcheck where she dances with their son and nobody has to know what the dancing means. The private morning after the unworthy post, when she sat with him in whatever state he was in and did not turn the sitting into a statement or a post or a carefully managed public narrative about resilience. The whisper backstage before the biggest night of his comeback, which the desert took and kept. She built that space. It did not exist before she decided to build it. It required her to absorb years of being treated as an intrusion in a story she had every right to be part of, to refuse to defend herself to an audience that had already decided, to continue building anyway with the stubbornness of someone who knows what is real and does not need the internet's agreement to keep it real. That is what the dancing in the empty field contains. That is what the whisper held. And that is what the caption finally, incompletely said. The night ended the way the best nights end, not with a clean resolution but with the sense of something having moved, something having shifted in the permanent direction. He said his wife's name out loud in the desert in front of 100,000 people. She heard it from the crowd, and her face did the thing that faces do when a private thing becomes suddenly public. When the words that were only ever meant for you arrive in a space designed for everyone and you understand in that moment that he chose to say them anyway. Not for the cameras, not for the crowd. For the same reason he says everything that is true, because it needed to be said out loud in a place where it would echo. She blew him a kiss. Something moved across her face that was not a performance and not a pose. The involuntary softening that happens when you have carried something heavy for a long time and someone you love acknowledges the weight in front of the whole world. Big Sean said you fought through it, and the crowd felt the truth of that, even though they only knew a fraction of what had been fought through. Billie Eilish collapsed on the stage because a kind person had seen the right moment and nudged her toward it, which is what Hailey does, sees the moment and moves it into existence without requiring credit for the moving. And somewhere in the desert, after the 100,000 people had gone home and the stage was being broken down and the temporary architecture of a single night was coming apart, the way temporary things do, efficiently and without ceremony, two people found each other the way they always do, without looking, without trying. The way that happens when you have been married long enough that finding each other is not navigation, it is just gravity. Nobody will ever know even an ounce of what it's taken to get here. Read that sentence again. Not as a celebrity caption, not as the carefully calibrated product of a PR strategy designed to manage the mixed reviews of the performance. Not as image management or brand positioning or the strategic deployment of vulnerability for audience engagement. As a statement from a person who has been present for something, for years of something, that has no adequate public language and cannot be adequately described in any caption, however honest, however long. Who watched her husband stand in front of a mirror every morning trying to make the left side of his face move, who sat with him through the post about feeling unworthy, which arrived weeks before the biggest performance of his comeback, and did not issue a statement and did not turn the sitting into content and did not make the difficulty into a story with a redemption arc she controlled, who held the difficulty in private, where it belonged, until the night came when the public version of it could finally stand on a stage and be seen, who danced in an empty field while he ran through songs for a performance that the whole world was watching anxiously, and who found a way, in the middle of all of that anxiety, to just dance. Not to demonstrate that she was coping, not to perform resilience for the camera, just to move, because the music was playing and her son was in her arms and there was nothing left to do about the night except be present for it. Nobody will ever know what she said backstage before he walked out. Nobody will ever know what the hardest morning looked like in that house, which morning it was, what was needed, whether she had it to give on that particular day, or whether she gave it even when she didn't quite have it, the way people do when they have decided that the person they are with is worth the cost of giving something they don't have. Whether there were mornings when the weight of everything, the recovery, the unworthy post, the world watching, the stage waiting, settled into the house in a way that made the day feel impossible. Whether she found a way through those mornings anyway, not by making them lighter, but by staying in them. Nobody will ever know what it costs to love someone whose recovery is real and ongoing and never fully finished, and who is honest about that, publicly honest, in the way that makes him more vulnerable than the mythology of his comeback requires, and to be the person who stays anyway. Who does not frame the staying as sacrifice because that framing would make the love conditional in a way she has decided it is not going to be. Who stays because she chose to, in the full knowledge of what the choice would ask, and who keeps choosing, morning after morning in the private hours that generate no content and produce no headlines. Nobody will ever know the specific weight of 8 years of that. 8 years of the fandom's grief being redirected at her, of the comment sections and the comparison edits and the fabricated screenshots and the narrative that said she was a mistake in a story that was supposed to end differently. 8 years of choosing daily to build something real inside all of that noise, to refuse to let the noise reach the things that matter, to dance in an empty field while the internet ran its theories and her husband ran through songs on a stage that would fill in a few hours with 100,000 people who knew only a fraction of the story. Nobody will ever know what she said in the empty field. That is not a lament. It is a promise. It is the specific promise that the most important things make when they are real. They stay private. They stay between the people they belong to. They resist the machine that wants to process everything into content. The whisper belongs to them. The dance belongs to all of us. And the distance between those two things, between what is private and what becomes public, between what is whispered and what echoes across 100,000 people in the dark, is where the real love lives, not in the performance, in the empty field before it, in the words nobody heard, in the woman who knew, without being told, what the night needed and who made it happen quietly, with a nudge and a word and 8 years of showing up. in the caption that said everything by saying only what nobody would ever know. Hailey Bieber whispered something to Justin before Coachella. Nobody heard it. He walked out onto that stage and stood in front of 100,000 people and said her name. The whisper that nobody heard. The name that everyone did. That is the whole story. That is the thing she built. The soundcheck footage, the dancing in the empty field, is the image that will last longer than any other moment from that weekend. Not the laptop segment, not the streaming records, not any of the discourse about whether the performance was ambitious enough or spectacle enough or whatever Coachella headliners are supposed to be. The dancing in the empty field. Because that is what love looks like when it has nothing to prove, when there is no audience to perform for and no narrative to manage, and just the music playing on a stage that hasn't filled yet, and the person you built a life with running through songs in the distance, and your child against your chest, and the desert around you, holding everything in its particular silence. She danced because the music was playing and there was nothing left to do about the night except be present for it. She walked to the edge of the stage. She said something. He walked back to the microphone. And the rest is what the world saw. The performance that the world spent a week arguing about. The laptop segment. The Hailey Babe Hallelujah. The Billie Eilish moment. Big Sean saying you fought through it in front of a crowd that only knew a fraction of what had been fought. The streaming records, the caption, the 4 words that stopped everything. Nobody will ever know. What the rest of us got was the performance. What the two of them kept was everything else. The whisper belongs to them. The dance belongs to all of us. And the distance between those two things, between what is private and what becomes public, between what is whispered and what echoes across 100,000 people in the dark, is where the real love lives. Not in the performance, in the empty field before it, in the words nobody heard, in the woman who knew, without being told, that the moment needed her to nudge someone toward a stage. Who knew, without being asked, what would make the night feel true rather than enormous? Who has spent 8 years learning the specific language of one person, his silences and his fears and his particular brand of bravery that looks like stillness from the outside, and who used all of that knowledge quietly in the moments nobody was watching to make the performance possible. In the caption that said everything by saying only what nobody would ever know. Hailey Bieber whispered something to Justin before Coachella. Nobody heard it. He walked out onto that stage and stood in front of 100,000 people and said her name. The whisper that nobody heard. The name that everyone did. That is the whole story. That is the thing she built. There is a particular kind of love story that the internet does not know how to tell. Not because it is rare, but because it moves too slowly for the format. It does not produce the right kind of content. It does not have a turning point that photographs well or a moment of crisis that generates the necessary engagement or a reunion that can be scored to the right song and distributed in 30-second clips. It has, instead, a woman dancing in a field, a man on a stage running through songs, a child against her chest, the desert holding everything in its silence. It has 8 years of choosing the same person in the full knowledge of what the choice costs and not requiring the choosing to be witnessed. It has a whisper that nobody heard and a name that everyone did, and the specific distance between those two things that is where love actually lives. Not in the performance, not in the public declaration, not in the viral clip, but in the accumulation of private hours that make the public moment possible. That is the whole story of Bieberchella. Not the laptop segment, not the streaming records, not any of the discourse about whether the performance was ambitious enough or sincere enough or whatever Coachella headliners are supposed to be in 2026. The empty field, the dancing, the whisper, the name. She built all of it, in the years when nobody was watching, in the mornings that don't photograph, in the decision, made daily and without announcement, to stay. Nobody will ever know what she said. He said her name in the desert. That is enough. Some things are not meant to be known. Some moments are not meant to be captured. Some words are not meant to travel further than the 2 inches between one person's mouth and another person's ear, in a field that has not yet filled, before a night that will change something permanently. The desert understood this. It took the words and kept them. That is what deserts do with the things that matter. They hold them, quietly, in the heat that stays even after the sun has gone. She danced in the empty field. She walked to the edge of the stage, she said something that nobody heard, and he walked back to the microphone and gave us everything else. That is enough. That has always been enough.